And now I am going to read our opening reading, which is by Howard Thurman, who is not UU, but who is often quoted in our churches for one reason, because he's really wise and wonderful. The old story of my spirit has wearied itself out. It has long ago been learned by heart. It repeats itself over and over, bringing no added joy to my day or lift to my spirit. I will tell a new story. I must learn the new story for the new needs. I must fashion new words born of all the new growth of my life, of my mind, of my spirit. I must prepare for new melodies that have never been mine before, that all that is within me may lift up my voice. Therefore, I shall rejoice with each new day and delight my spirit in each fresh unfolding. I will tell this day a new story. Emily, we're so glad to have you. Okay, Emily, you're muted. You need to, and so was I, so I couldn't get to.
Okay.
Okay, that looks
all right.
good.
All right. All right. All right. Yes. Yes. Well, that makes it a lot easier for you to hear me. I was saying that I'm just very pleased and excited to be here. Bit nervous, but that's okay. As I'm sure those of you that have done this before and will do it in the future feel similar. First off, I'm gonna ask Mark Arrow if he can put his picture on, because I may mention you later on. Can you say hello, Mark? Okay, I guess you're not there. You may notice someone that's named Ann Arrow. That is an old friend of mine from like back in LRY days, back when I was 16 or so. And I told him I was going to be on, and so he may be listening for whatever that's worth. He's over in Oregon, so he got up early to maybe see me. But okay, I was born in Texas back in 1954. Mother had gone down there to stay with her mother to have me, and when I was born, it was 117 degrees that day.
And no air conditioning.
No air conditioning
anywhere.
My at the time, my parents were living up in Connecticut, but because we had my sister who was just 2 years old, it was a challenge being by herself to have me. So she went down, spent the summer, and had me down there. And so that's how I was born in Texas. I lived in Connecticut until I was about 2 or so, and don't remember a whole lot about it. Mostly sliding down snowy hills on a cookie tin, and my sister falling down the stairs and scraping her nose. And there are stories of when we had cats in, and when one got too close, I kept reaching out and grabbing them by the neck and holding on to them. I've loved animals since then. My sister one day decided that since we had chickens, that I was not a person, but I was a chicken, and so mother came in and found her feeding me scraps. I don't remember that, but that's kind of one of our early stories of that I've always found is kind of cute. From Connecticut, we went to California via Texas too. We stopped in there briefly during the summer and then moved to Riverside area of California. My father was a teacher at the time, and he had gotten a position, I believe, as, was he a principal or just a music teacher? Yeah,
He had been a principal.
he'd been a principal in Connecticut. Now he was a music teacher. Widely varied and interesting person. Both of my parents have had a profound influence on my life, and the best way to say how they were in my upbringing was to say they did the best they could. In that no one can know exactly what to say or do at a given time to give the most or do the best for anybody, but they did a good job and supported me and loved me and encouraged me all throughout my lifetime. And for that, I am very thankful. And Mother did not make me say that. In California, we lived in 3 areas. Oops, I forgot to turn on my clock. Let me just put this on so I don't ramble too long. Okay. In California, we lived out in the desert in Riverside for a long time. And I don't remember too much except for just kind of running free. We lived a good part of it kind of out in the country. And so I could, run down the road and visit friends, or we had fields across from us and stuff, and it was just a wonderful time to be there. That's where we got one of our first animals, a dachshund named Longfellow, and he was quite a character. He just was a part of my life throughout. He was my sister's dog, but he was wonderful. From there, we moved to San Diego. And so that was when I was kind of 5, 6, getting into kindergarten, first grade and stuff. And some of the main things I remember about that was being close to the Pacific Ocean, and sometimes we would drive down there to where the ocean liners came in, and we would buy interesting things from the cruise ships, their foods, their pastries and stuff that I guess were like day old or leftover or something, and just seeing the huge aircraft carriers that were there, and going to the San Diego Zoo and stuff. It was just almost bigger than California is almost like a magical place that it's not really there, but it is, because it was just so big. And from there we went up to Santa Maria, where I started for second grade and such. And I don't remember much up there either. Just kind of running around being who I was. But that's also where I started having some of my trouble, though it wasn't diagnosed until we moved to Texas, which was in 63, I believe. But it was once again a really amazing place. It's up in the hills above Santa Barbara, and you could look out and see fields of flowers being grown. And we lived downwind from a glue factory and a beet refining place. And so if the wind blew in the wrong direction, you could definitely tell it. It left an impact on me, the stench of those 2 places, though luckily it didn't blow the wrong way very often. From California, we moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and that's kind of where I really started knowing who I was, having my life and such. We moved there in March, and I was having trouble in school still. Didn't know why exactly, but I was, having trouble copying things and doing some other things. And it turns out that that was the pilot year for special education in Fort Worth, Texas. And I was one of 16 people chosen to go into their pilot class. I was diagnosed with some sort of learning disabilities. Back then, they didn't differentiate what they were, didn't know ADD, ADHD, things like that. But I spent a year in special education, which really helped me to be able to function in school. I was able, I read all the time and was smart and capable and stuff, but there were just some things that I had trouble doing, like copying and, some things of that sort. So we learned a lot during those years in Texas about learning disabilities and functioning and such. And that's had a profound effect on my life, not just the learning disabilities, but also they didn't know about things like hyperactivity or that you viewed things differently, different perspective. Some of the physical things, Mother doesn't remember this, but I remember sometimes I would stand in the doorway and kind of let my head beat against the door frame, or I'd have to go outside and hang upside down and stuff just to make myself feel balanced again, or something. Though I never was visibly different or incapable of functioning, because I was a high ability person. But it did have a profound effect on me as I was growing up and throughout school and such. While I was in Texas, we were there for about 8 years, 9 years, something like that. I came of age, went from being 8 years old to 17. So those were 10 very critical years of my life. One of my memories is that I used to love to go out, especially one place that we lived in, Fort Worth. We were about 4 blocks from a TCU golf course. And so I used to love to go walk down to the golf course and around at like 5 in the morning. I'd get up and just go wander. Now, this was back in the early 60s, before it wasn't considered a bad thing to do. You were allowed to be a lot freer in where you went and what you did. We backed up to a shopping center, and I could, walk up there and go to the bookmobile or go to the grocery store by myself at even 8 or 10 or so, which was, considering the way that things are now, really remarkable that I could, that I had the freedom to just wander as I wished, so long as I didn't stay out too late or disappear or something. And then when we moved to our last place that we lived in, Fort Worth, we were about maybe a mile from the Fort Worth Zoo. And I used to love to get up at, once again, 5 in the morning, and I'd walk down to the zoo and then over to the Botanic Gardens and all the way up there and then across the bridge and then come up on another part. It was like probably about a 5-mile walk. And just, I do it a few times a year and just used to love to just go out and wander and think and such. And I found it a very calming thing to do. Also in Fort Worth, we were part of the First Unitarian Church of Fort Worth. And that was my first real taste of being in a Unitarian church. We'd been to one up in California I don't remember much about. They really didn't have a good RE, not there and not at the church either. But the church was in turmoil. The minister they had was a really nasty person in my opinion. I was very active in LRY, which I'll get into later. And at one point, he kept trying to dissolve the LRY chapter at the church. And if I didn't show up for the board meeting every month, then they voted out. One month I missed, and they totally obliterated LRY. One time I was giving a back rub to a paper boy, and he saw me, and he spurred on the church that I was out having relations with strange boys on street corners. And so it was a very turbulent time in the church, and I didn't really feel supported in the church, but I did in LRY. LRY is Liberal Religious Youth. It was the youth organization that was, I guess, in effect from the 60s to the 70s, and then it got a bad reputation because there was drugs and young people running rampant and stuff. Any of you that have been with the Unitarian Church for a while know about, have heard or have stories of LRY. But it had a profound effect on me in that I learned about interacting with people, taking responsibilities, the spiritual, caring, being part of an accepting community and such, which is, of course, what being in the Unitarian Church is. I was always kind of strange in that I perceive things differently, or I would go off on a strange tangent, or just being me. And I was allowed to be me with all my good and bad sides and stuff, and I was accepted. And that was the first time that I had really felt accepted out in the greater community, because I was kind of odd. When I would think I was running around being normal, and one of my favorite English teachers one time came up to me and said, "Emily, you are such an enigma." And I had no idea what she was talking about. I was just being me. I didn't find myself to be that strange, but obviously I was. Also, while I was in Fort Worth, a coffee house opened up that was sponsored by the YMCA just down the block from me. And so I became very active in that. I'd bake bread once or twice a week to raise money for the place. I interacted with different people. Once again, I was in a place that I was welcome and accepted, and that made all the difference. Also, the reason that I mentioned Rick Maston to see if Libby had his poetry books was that's when he was very active, and I got to see him several times, both up at camp and also at the Dallas church and such. And his poetry really identified with me, helped to define me, gave me a feeling of expression and such, and I will always hold that very close. One question I had was, is a lot of the things that happened to me or the way I felt, was it due to my learning disabilities and the way I perceive things? Or was it just because I'm me and that's who I am? That's kind of been a question that's run through my life for a good bit of time. Okay, came up to Rochester in 72, graduated from Brighton High. From there, after being graduating from high school year, I was told that I needed to either go to college or get a job. And since a boyfriend of mine, Mark, who may still be on here somewhere, maybe he'll show his face later on, lived in Arkansas, and I found a job with Acorn. At the time, it was Arkansas Community Organization for Reform now, but it became American Association. So I was down there when they were still just in Arkansas, when they first went outside of Arkansas. And I worked there for about 9 months in the office, and it was an amazing place, and where I really got an appreciation for organizing, community organizing, other people, poverty, ecology, and things of that sort. And before that, living at home with a mother around, I sort of had a sense of civic duty. When I was 10, she had me out helping to register voters. I, sometimes go with her on some of her other community things and stuff. And so in Little Rock, that kind of blossomed. I left there in 79. I was there from 74 to 79 after the beginning of a year that was very tough on me. It started with me getting hepatitis really bad in February, went through about another year and a half, and ended up with me moving back up here and getting shot in the leg up at whatever the park is that's up by Lake Ontario, Eastman Park. I was chaperoning kids from the Boy Scout, their co-ed thing, and just happened upon some people came up and tried to break in, and I went out to look at the area with one of the other counselors and got shot. And so that sort of put me into a lot of depression. There are various ways that I kind of time my life. One is by my moves. One is by my depressions. They sometimes come around the same time. But they're always defining to me. I always get through them. I've never really had to go into anything extreme with my depressions, but when I have them, I drive down the street crying, or I don't get out much or move much, beyond just the bare essentials for months on end. But I think partially due to my mother and probably my father is you just keep going one step in front of the other. You don't stop. You just kind of function as best you can, and it will all go away and move forward. Things never stop. And I got my will from my mother. I got my sense of humor from my father. When I was about 5, I decided, because I sat behind Daddy in the car, I was his child and my sister was Mother's child. So though I loved Mother dearly, I was Daddy's person, and he was my parent. So I set out to follow him and went with him a lot when he'd go out shopping for cameras or sailing or things like that. Then I just loved to be with him. And he had an amazing sense of humor. He was also a very gentle person. Mother is more competitive. Daddy was just he was systematic and liked to figure things out and such, but he didn't like to go for the win. But he would come home from work oftentimes and plop down at the dinner table and come up with puns and jokes that he learned at work, and we'd all sit there and go, "Oh, very good, Dad." And so it was from there that I got my sarcastic feel to me, my love of irony, my love of puns, my sort of view of things. I decided that I was an optimistic pessimist. The sun will come out tomorrow, life will be great, there's nothing that can stop me, the world is a good place. But then we're going to get hit by a meteor at some point, blow us all to hell, and that'll be the end of us. So there's always something dark over there, but till then I'll have a good time. So I went to Rochester when I was back up here, I met my first husband. We moved to Texas. That was not a good match. And 2 years later, I met my second husband, got married in '83. Colin had just gotten out of the Air Force and he was in the Weather Service. So the first job he had was in the Weather Service in Apalachicola, Florida. And that was a very rural town. We had one flashing light and we're the county seat. And so that gives you an idea of how big it was. We were about halfway between Tallahassee and Panama City. And so if we wanted any sort of much nightlife besides really good seafood, because there were 4 seafood restaurants in town, we'd go to either, Tallahassee or Panama City for excitement. After 2.5 hurricanes that year, we moved up to Pennsylvania because we wanted to get away from the hurricanes. And we were up there for 8 years. That's where I started coming into following up on my civic feel. I got involved with a neighborhood group and an organization that was involved in everything from shelters to food banks to just wide range of things. Community action group, and I flourished in that. I loved that a lot. I was on the board of that, and also when they started up the second one, which was a community agency that helped to start small businesses and such. They told me, they asked me to sign, since I lived in Allentown at the time, to get their 501c3, and said, well, you can be secretary. And I said, no, I'm going to be president. Someone else can be secretary. There were 2 other guys. Just because I'm a female, I'm not the secretary. So I became the president, got the board, and that's where I kind of defined my feeling of inclusion. When I first started putting the board together, of course, I went to people I knew. Most of them were white, or all of them were white. And I was told that I needed diversification in the board. Well, at that point, I said, okay. So I went out and met people that, if I saw someone that I thought would be good on the board that lived within the parameters that they had to live in, I'd invite them. We had a very diverse board so far as Black and white and a gay Latino and such. And I also brought on the board 2 Republicans. And to me, diversity is not just filling quota and colors of skin and such. It is a variety of people with a common interest, but also a diversity of views. And those 2 Republicans were both active in their neighborhood groups. They were good people. And I also wanted to include, we had a growing community of East Indians and such. I felt they should be included, that we should include and have representation from everybody, not just African Americans and maybe a Hispanic here and there and stuff. That's not diversity, that's looking good. So we were in Allentown until '95, then we moved
You
to
don't tell about your own
Nashville.
family.
Oh, yes. Well, while I was there, I got an award for being active in the community and such, and making a difference. And so I got that about 8 or 9 months before we had to move again, because they were closing down the Allentown Weather Service. So we went to Nashville, which I lived from '95 to 2008. And that's a whole nother thing. I'm coming close to the end of my time, and just ask me about Nashville sometime. It had many profound effects on me. But I just want to touch on a few things. Well, I'll be quiet in a couple of minutes. Being Southern and the influences of my family, where I come from. I am the granddaughter and the great-granddaughter of a Southern family that had a plantation, that had slaves. That was the way it was, and I do not hate my family. I don't agree with slavery. I don't agree with discrimination. At the time, that's the way it was. From that, my grandfather, who's my mother's father, moved to Texas, and even though they didn't have slaves, they had help. But he was the sort who would go out and make sure people had food, give them what they needed, help to support them, be supportive of them in the 30s, in the 20s, in the middle of Texas. And it is the heart of the person, and it is the inner light of a person that matters, not necessarily what they did in a given time. And I feel very strongly about that. And I also feel very strongly about some liberals and a lot of Unitarians and such who are not open to the people they deal with because they are Trump supporters, because they have other bringings, because they have other thoughts and opinions. And I have found, as I have come to now, I'm 66, that I feel very strongly about the principles of UU. I found that I am a product of them, and one of them is the wealth and dignity of every human being, that they are worth listening to and hearing. If they're not willing to, if they're defensive and get into a shouting match, you walk away, but you don't discount them. You don't say things about them, Trump-ass people and the conservative, just all those people are human beings. One of the, when I got up here, I became a poll worker at one of the elections, and also the last election. And in that, I went into a room that was half Democrat and half Republican, and you couldn't have a political opinion. You couldn't talk about the issues. You couldn't talk about the people that were running. You had to be apolitical. And in that time, you couldn't tell the Republicans from the Democrats. You saw people as people, and respected them and talked to them and interacted with them. And to me, that was a great lesson, and one that I will hold very close. So the worth and dignity of every person. And the other thing that I feel very strongly in the 7 principles is the interdependent web in which we are a part. Everything connects to everything else. Whether it's the butterfly waving its wings or the drop in the pond or whatever, everything has consequences, everything fits together, and we are all a part of it, and just need to love and respect each other and love and respect what we are a part of, and recommit ourselves to being our best selves. So that's, I went over, and if you want to know more about me, I can go on for hours, but that's it for now. Any questions?
Well, I'm just unmuting myself, and we have another 15, 17 minutes. So I am curious about Nashville, because you brought that up, and Ann Perry just put in the chat, what brought you to Rochester?
Oh, okay, right, yep. What brought me to Nashville, I think I was telling Libby early on, before this really got started. I lived in Nashville with my husband, Colin. We were married for 34 years, and in 2017, he died after a long series of complications and illnesses. It wasn't heart disease, it wasn't cancer, side effects of diabetes and other things. And if you want to get me really hot and emotional, I can tell you about the 7 months that he spent in hospitals, where he was just badly treated. And it makes me scared because I was there like 4 or 5 days a week, and still I have horror stories. But after he died, I was in a position where I could stay where I was. We pretty much owned the house. I had a good part-time job. I had his pension, so I could have stayed there, gone to live with my sister in Galveston, come up here to live with Mother, or just gone out and moved anywhere. I wasn't extremely well off, but I was comfortable to where I could go most anywhere and be comfortable, just have a roof over my head, a car to drive, and do some fun things. But I decided that I liked Rochester. Rochester has a good soul. And also, I had been out of the house for 40 years and had missed a lot of time getting to know Mother and enjoying Mother. And she is someone that I respect and love highly. And she is so full of stories, and she is so full. She has great connections to people. Just tagging along behind her, I'm exposed to many interesting people, and it just sort of seemed like somewhere that I needed to be. So I came back to Rochester. Now, so far as Nashville, when I got there, not too long after I got there, I went to work for an organization that was big on it. It was kind of an umbrella group of other groups. We had several of the churches in it, and Common Cause, and Now, and just all kind of groups and stuff. So I was the coordinator for that for a year, and I also got involved in tying Nashville together, which was sort of a community action agency. They do things to have demonstrations or do things on the government, like fix the neighborhoods, make sure that the street lights work, the trash was picked up, things that impacted the city. They were, and so I was involved with them for a while. I was involved in the Unitarian Church for a while too, and was just really busy running around. Kind of almost burned myself out because I was doing a lot of kind of trying to continue what I was doing in Allentown and bring it on down to Nashville, and it just wasn't as good a mix. So then I went to work for Borders, and most of my working life I worked in bookstores. Started out in Walden's, worked for Walden's/Borders for 10 years, then went to work with Books A Million, which is another big book thing, for 8 years till I came up here. Loved working in books. Did the kids section for several years at the Books A Million, and just loved that. Love kids books, love kids. Also down there, I kind of got used to my wild side, as it were. I got into Dungeons and Dragons and live role playing and stuff. Found I loved that. I didn't get into the or whatever they call it, where you dress up, but I could have and would have loved that. I like being outrageous at times. I decided when I was somewhere that when I really got decked up and went out, I didn't want to turn heads. I wanted to break necks, just kind of wow. So that's kind of Nashville in essence. Life with Colin. He was a good man, an interesting man, got me involved in a lot of different things. I got into board gaming, things like that. So history stuff, love Civil War history. So, any other questions?
I'm going to unspotlight you, and so that we